It was Angela's first trip to Egypt. She was not alone, because the tour group consisted of no fewer than 3 families. On the day the group finally set out for the Great Pyramids, Angela was still sitting relaxed on the bus there, not knowing what this day would bring. Angela was fascinated by ancient Egypt from an early age, so this trip meant a lot to her. She had bought a brand new camera, especially for this trip. That way, she was able to capture all the beautiful, special moments. Also, when she herself posed for a photo at the pyramids, Angela had bought this camera on purpose because it could take razor-sharp photos. Thus, she was able to review every detail of their wondrous journey once it was over. Thanks to the software that came with her, she was able to zoom in well on the background of the photo. And that's exactly what she did. It wasn't until the family returned home that Angela made a discovery she wished she hadn't. In the background of the photo, she saw someone she hadn't seen in over 20 years. She had to blink for a moment, but he was really there. She had mastered the software quickly, so it only took a few seconds for her to zoom in properly. The man Angela saw standing there was her father. But how on earth could he be there? Was he there by chance, or had he followed her to Egypt? "Walter, come quickly." Angela called to her husband. She showed him the zoomed-in photo, but he didn't seem to understand what he was looking at. "Who is that?" he asked her. Angela had completely forgotten that her husband had never met her father. She sighed and decided to tell him everything. Angela had had a happy, carefree childhood when her father was part of the family. But when Angela was 15 years old, her father went on business trips more and more, and he was less and less at home. Until it got too much. Angela's father met another woman, and after a difficult period with a lot of arguing, he broke off all contact with Angela, her mother, and her brother. It was a difficult time, but Angela was a strong woman who decided she would shape her own life, and she did. By the time she turned 21, she was already the boss of her own company and traveled all over the world talking to business associates and customers. Walter was amazed at her story, but also proud. "You have to investigate," he said. "How is it possible that he suddenly shows up in Egypt when we are there too?" Angela was eager to know the answer. She grabbed her coat, got in the car, and drove straight to her mother's house. When Angela drove up to her mother's house, she was already waiting for her in the doorway. "What is it, Mom?" Angela asked. Her mother smiled weakly and invited her in. That made Angela even more tense, and she immediately decided to ask for an explanation. As it turned out, Angela's father had called earlier that week. Angela knew that her mother, like her, had been out of contact with this man for years. So this news came out of the blue. Her mother didn't want to say anything about the conversation, except that her father wanted to speak to Angela, and that conversation would totally change her life. Though Angela grew increasingly frustrated, she decided to agree to the conversation. She didn't like the fact that her mother wouldn't tell her, but her curiosity was bigger than that. Why was he so secretive? Her mother gave her the address of a hotel in the city, and that's where she went. It was an old hotel in a part of town she hadn't been often. What a strange place to meet your very own daughter. Angela rang the small bell on the desk, whereupon an old little man appeared from the room beyond. "Good morning, ma'am. What can I help you with?" asked the old man in a slightly shaky voice. "I'm here for Vincent Montgomery," Angela said determinedly. But the man looked at her in a daze. It took a few seconds for the man to look at his log. He turned a dusty page and said, "Ah, there you will have it. Mr. Montgomery is in room 133 on the 3rd floor." Angela thanked him and walked quickly towards the elevator. But while she was waiting for the elevator, something very unexpected happened. The elevator door went up slowly and creaking, and when she got to the 3rd floor, it happened. Angela looked up and saw an older version of her father standing there. She hadn't seen him in so long that she was shocked at how much older he had grown. He looked at her with watery eyes. "Hello, dear Angela." For a moment, Angela didn't know what to say back, but soon her father said, "I'm sorry we haven't spoken for so long." Angela said, "What are you doing here?" "I'm coming to see you, Vincent," her father started. "There's something we need to talk about." When Angela was 12 years old, her father got a job at a multinational company that required him to travel all over the world. Angela knew that, But she didn't know what her father was telling her now. Her parents had already decided to split up. She listened open-mouthed to her father's story. He said that he had met a woman during one of his travels in the south of India. She was part of a company Vincent worked with at the time. While he traveled extensively for several years and met many people, he could never get her out of his mind. But he didn't know how to find her. Until one day he decided to ask the partner company where she worked if he could speak to her. Much to his disappointment, he was told she no longer worked there. But he didn't stop there, because after a long time searching for his things, he finally came across her card, and there was a phone number on it. And one thing led to another. He called her. She struck up a conversation and Vincent declared his love to her. Fortunately for Vincent, it was mutual, he said with a smile. Angela then looked at him questioningly. "Then why didn't you contact me again?" Her father lowered his head and sighed. "When I told your mother that I had met someone, she was so angry that I was never allowed to contact you again," he said. With a small tear, she asked, "But how did you find me in Egypt?" "That was pure coincidence," Vincent replied. He said that the woman he was going to live with was an Egyptian woman, and that they had been living in Cairo for over 15 years, close to the hotel where Angela and her family were staying. He'd spotted her as they walked out of the hotel and couldn't believe his eyes. Angela's father had therefore followed her all the way to the pyramids. He kept wanting to come close to say hello, but he didn't dare. Angela walked over to her father and gave him a big hug. He was clearly upset and deeply ashamed, but he was her father. As she let go of him, she looked at him. "I think it's okay to talk to Mom. Let's go see her." But Vincent really didn't like that. Once she arrived at her mother's house, Angela helped her father out of the car. The tension was to cut. Angela's father was very nervous, so she was the one who rang the bell. This was the moment of truth. Would her parents be able to get through the same door again? Angela's mother opened the door, and for a few seconds it was so quiet that you could hear the autumn leaves falling. "Hello, Martha," her father said suddenly. Angela thought it would be good if we could talk too. Without a word, Angela's mother stepped aside to let them in. What happened next brought tears to Angela's eyes. It was Angela's mother who suddenly apologized. "I'm sorry I kept you away from your daughter all these years," she told him. "I was so angry and disappointed that I didn't know what to do." Vincent smiled and said he was at peace with it, especially since he and Angela could finally see and speak to each other again. Then Angela's mother did something unexpected. She walked over to Angela's father and hugged him gently. Tears streamed down Angela's cheeks when she saw that. She was so happy that the discovery in an ordinary vacation photo had led to a friendly reunion of her parents. Nothing could ruin her day now.